Amen. You guys can be seated this morning. So we're coming towards the end of our series in Haggai, and just for those who haven't been with us or missed some Sundays, we're in this small. It's a minor prophet. That's what they call it, but that's just because it's shorter. And it's been towards the end of the Israelites and Judah and the people of God's people, the Jews. It's the end of, they've come back and things are hopefully changing in their mind and their hearts, and they've been away for 70 years. They knew that Jeremiah had prophesied that they were going to be gone in captivity. The Babylonians took them to Babylon, and they've been there for 70 years, and now they've come back. And as they come back, we recognize that in the first chapter we talked about at the very beginning, the issue, last week we said that, there's bad news and there's good news and there's a prescription. And so the bad news was they had become complacent. They started off really well at the very beginning. They put an altar to God. They started doing the worship that God had prescribed for them. They had built a foundation of the temple because the temple had been destroyed. And then what happened through some obstacles and just stuff started going on. They probably started thinking, man, where am I going to live? What am I going to do? And suddenly, 16 years had passed and there's nothing else that had happened. And it's still just the altar and the foundation. And so God calls Haggai and the prophet Zechariah, and he calls them and he says, hey, tell my people what's going on. Give them the bad news. And the bad news was, part of the reason why they were struggling so hard is they had made themselves the object that was most important. Their priority had been their own homes. Their priority had been whether I'm going to have enough to eat for tomorrow. And God said, you missed making me the priority. And so he said, you need to go back and start building the temple. And we remember that their hearts actually came to the point that as Haggai said that, their hearts were pushed and convinced that they needed to go and move forward. So they said yes to the Lord. And as they did, God started moving and reminded them, I am with you. And then we remembered that, so originally complacency and apathy, and then suddenly, we talked last week that there came a point where just a few weeks later, they looked around and they had started trying to build and really bringing the materials in, and they looked at it, and Haggai was just truthful. He said, hey, you're looking at this, and you're saying, oh, is this ever going to get done? I mean, there's so much to do still. And how, along with us, like just as easy for our hearts, when we first become believers or when we're really following after God, we're excited, but then we get apathetic and we get complacent in our walk with God. But then just in this same way, we look and we've gone 10 years and 20 years and 40 years, and we look and we go, why am I not already completely sanctified? Why am I still impatient? Why do I not treat people with kindness all the time? Why have I not figured out how to love others in ways they need to be loved and God calls me to love? And so they became despairing. They looked and they said, this is just never going to happen. And that's often the way we feel, right? We're walking with God, but what we're hoping would happen in our lives and what we're hoping God would do in our lives, it's just not happening. And it's so easy for us to fall into that same despair. And so this morning, the great thing about Haggai is unlike most of the other prophets, where it's written in poetry and you kind of don't know exactly what's going on, Haggai just lays it out there. It's prose, and he actually gives dates to all of when God told him to say something. And so today we see it's 2 months later after he had called them out on their despair and reminded them of the prescription, which was, hey, that's not going to get done on its own. The first thing you need to do you remember? He said, work. Go to work. Go pick up and do what I've said to do. But then the promise with that, the other three things was God said, I'm with you, my presence will be with you, and I will complete it. So it's a sense of, hey, you can't just sit around and hope that something just miraculously appears. And in the same way in our lives, we can't just go, you know what, I sure hope I become more sanctified. I sure hope that, God moves me and changes me. God says, I've got callings for you, and amongst the calling I have for you, in doing that and getting up and working, I will complete the work that I've already begun. Well, now we're to the point where it's 2 months later, and the people have done some stuff, and they expect things to have just changed dramatically. And so here we are in Haggai chapter 2, verses 10 through 12, we read this. On the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Ask the priests what the law says. Now, before we read verse 12, I want you to catch this. Go back to the previous slide. It says, ask the priests what the law says. Now, this is important to understand. They didn't have printed Bibles. They didn't have printed Old Testament text. The only way they knew what God said was when the priest would bring out the law and teach it to them. And so part of what had happened, part of the problem, is that the priests stopped teaching. And so here he's saying the priests need to be asked what the law says. So they're the ones who would know what he's about to say was in the law. And so we get to verse 12. It says, if someone carries consecrated meat in the fold of their garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, olive oil, or other food, does it become consecrated? And the priest answered, no. And I know what you're thinking right now, like, what does this verse have to do with anything? Like, I don't get it, right? If someone carries a consecrated meat in the fold of their garment and the fold touch, I mean, what is all that about? Well, I'm here to tell you, okay? So in Leviticus chapter 6, which is part of the law, one of the things God told the people to do is you need to make a sin offering. And the sin offering was on behalf of their sins. And when they would make that offering, and it would be a sacrifice of an animal, when they made that offering, that there were certain parts of that animal that the priest would be able to take home and eat. And his sons would be able to eat with him. And so the idea was this flesh that had been made as a sacrifice for sin was now consecrated, set apart, or a lot of the word you would hear, holy. You know, we kind of think of holy as perfect, but that's not really what that word means. It is an understanding of it was set apart special. And so here's this piece of meat, and it's saying, hey, once you've made that, he says, hey, priest, if a priest is carrying this set apart flesh, this set apart sacrifice, and it's touching the folds of his garment, and then the fold touches something, does that make it holy? Well, what does that mean? Well, here's the other thing. It says in Leviticus 6:27 that anything that touches that flesh, that piece that was set apart, anything that touches it, it is holy. So when they would carry it, as they carried the meat would make the garment holy by touching it. Now, this is going to point to Christ. You're going to see here in a second. It's really cool how this points to Christ. But what happened is, when he's carrying it, that garment is now made holy or set apart. But the question was asked, since that garment's now holy, does anything that garment touch become holy? And the priests recognized the answer to that is no. Now, I want you to catch this. What was happening to the people and where they were is they understood that the temple was holy. And that once they started building, which is they had started building the temple, that when God's presence came, that temple was holy. But what they had started saying is what they had mistaked from long ago, which is now that we have a holy temple, the land is holy, I'm holy, what I do is holy, it's all good, we're good, we've got it holy. And what God is saying, hold up, the transfer from the meat that's sacrificed, by the way, think about this. This is Christ. This is the very picture of Christ, is that Christ sacrificed himself on the cross. Do you remember what really confused the Jews, what he said at one point in John? He said, you must eat of my what? Flesh and drink my blood. Why? Because that's what makes you holy? Here's the picture. Did you catch this in Haggai? He's saying, this flesh, this sin offering, what was Christ for us? The sin offering. This sin offering, it is holy, and whatever it touches is holy. Now let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30. Paul writes this, God has united you with Christ Jesus, For our benefit, God made him to be wisdom itself. Christ made us right with God. He made us what? Pure and holy, and he freed us from sin. See, here's the thing is, now we have Christ, and he's like that flesh that had been sacrificed. And whatever Christ touched is made holy. And we're told when we in faith accept Christ as our Lord and Savior, guess what it says? We are made holy. So remember, the temple for them was a building that the presence of God would be on. The temple for us, the Bible declares, is our body, and that when the Spirit of Christ comes in us, our body is made holy. Now, what he's saying and what we got to catch is, just because our body is holy does not make everything we do or everything we think, what? Holy. That's what he's trying to remind them there. He says, the temple's holy, but all the other things that temple's touching, the land, when you go into it, whatever else, that does not automatically make it holy. Now, if there was they would never be allowed to touch it, but the reality is anything that touched that flesh, that piece of meat, that it would be considered holy. So the fold is holy, the temple is holy, but not everything else. Basically, there's no third degree of holiness. So for us, what does that mean? And what was he trying to tell them? He's saying it's not enough for you to just assume that everything you do is holy because the temple's there. In the same way, it's for us. In fact, we read this in Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. And this could be written to us. The Lord says, "These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught." What's he saying? It's not enough when we sing words on Sunday. If you haven't allowed the holiness of God to touch your heart, and this isn't emotions. For them in Hebrew, heart isn't like what we talk about. Heart is love, heart's the emotion. No, heart is where all of thought and your very being was. That's when they say heart. So the fact is, you're doing stuff, but you haven't consecrated your heart. You haven't let me consecrate your heart. So every action that you do means nothing to me without your heart. Singing words without giving God our heart and saying, "God, I want you to set apart, to consecrate my heart. I want my heart and all of my actions to be yours." If we don't do that on Sunday morning and you walk in here and you check your attendance and you sing the songs, that means nothing to God. If you give money either at the back or from your bank or however else, if you give money to the church or to the things of God, but your heart is not consecrated and your giving is not consecrated to Him, not thought of as set apart, but you're just doing it as an action, can I tell you something? It means nothing to God. It's just your work, your duty. You think it's enough. If the words that you speak are not consecrated to Him, no matter how many Bible verses you can spout off, it means nothing to God. Everything that He desires and that He wants set apart, we have to give Him and allow Him to set it apart. It's not enough just to do stuff. Good works, remember we've talked over and over, you've heard me say, in Isaiah 64, Isaiah says, hey, your good works are disgusting. And a lot of times we're like, well, why is that? It's because they were doing them without actually allowing them to be about Him. They were just doing something. You remember last week when I described me learning to love the unlovable guy who moved across the street when I first got out here? And I told y'all, my heart was legitimately, Lord, I want you to teach me how to love like you. And then the guy moved in across the street, And then, we had interactions, and I told you, he finally said, hey, let's go do discipleship. And we talked that, 2-3 days went by, and all he did was talk. And my heart cried out, well, God, what is this for? Because in reality, those actions, that work I put in, my desire was not necessarily to see me love the unlovable, but for me to see him become lovable. Hey, spouses, we ever thought about that? Right? Our goal, our desire is, hey, God, change them so I can love them better. Like, God, if you would just take away him squeezing the toothpaste from the middle, it would make it so I could love him more. My wife would probably say, if you could just keep him from leaving the dishes in the sink. I could. The goal sometimes, and I know I look back during that time, and my first thought, even though I went to work, my first thought really was more about, God, let me disciple him so he will become more lovable. And you remember what God really reminded me after about the third day? He said, Daniel, your original desire and my true desire for you is that you learn to love him no matter what. That pleases me. And so my heart had to go, God, consecrate my heart, set it apart for the things of you. And then when I'm walking with him, rather than trying to fix him or do something to make it better for me, the idea was, Lord, fix me and give me a heart that pleases you. Set my heart so that then my actions can also be consecrated to you. The holiness in every way, it doesn't just come like, okay, the presence of God lives in me and we're declared holy, but then my actions and my heart, my mind aren't necessarily holy unless I purposefully make them and ask God to consecrate them. And in the midst of this, I also want to make this really clear, because this also has to do with salvation, right? The very essence of holiness is putting our trust in Jesus Christ. I want everyone here to hear this really clearly, okay? Are you ready? You are not saved because your family, from your great-grandfather to your grandfather to your dad to your mom to your friends to your sister and brother, because they were saved does not make you saved. You do not receive the holiness, set apartness of the Spirit of God from somebody else. Okay, this is that transitory. You are only made holy through Christ himself, through your faith in Jesus Christ. It is not put on you by how many times you showed into church. It's not put on you by all the works you've done. Hey, pastor, I've given this amount of money and I've gone and served people. Well, you know what? God even himself says, many of you will declare, I've done all these things in your name. And you know what God says, I never knew you. You do not receive the holiness and the salvation of God except through Christ on your own. There's no one here who, when you were born in human form, were immediately born into the kingdom of God. All of us at one time were separated by sin. Now, when we're born into a Christian family, it talks about we have a certain amount of covering, but that's not salvation, okay? You are only saved by trusting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I want to make that clear because I hear so many people still that I run into, and they're like, oh yeah, I've always been saved. I've always known God. You might have known about God, but to know God, there's a moment where you go from death to life, and that is the Spirit, through the Spirit, by taking on the flesh, eating Christ's flesh and drinking his blood, like saying yes to Jesus Christ. All right? So I just wanted to clear that up because it's right here as well in what Haggai's talking about. All right, so now we go to Haggai chapter 2, verse 13 and 14. And there's something even, he asked again to the priest. It says, then Haggai said, if a person is defiled or made unclean by contact with a dead body, touches one of these things, does it become defiled? Remember, he was saying all these different things that would would not be made holy by the fold. Well, do they get defiled by someone who's touched a dead body? Yes, the priest replied, it becomes defiled. Then Haggai said, so it is with these people and this nation in my sight, declares the Lord. Whatever they do and whatever they offer there is defiled. What's he saying? Defiled is a word of unclean. If you understand the Old Testament, one of the things that God taught them is, you can't just come into my presence lackadaisical. You can't just assume that you can enter into a relationship and fellowship with a perfect God and just say, whatever I'm doing, whatever's been done, you just got to accept me the way I am. And so unclean, back then, there were certain things that made you unclean. In particular, if you touched a dead body, you were made unclean. And what would happen is, you would have to go through a cleansing ritual for a certain amount of days for each thing that would make you unclean before you could come and worship God. And it was a sense at that time to say, I am this authority that is above all, and you can't just come into my presence and just assume that you're okay no matter what you've done. And it was a teaching. Now here's the amazing thing for us on this side of the new covenant, is our cleansing is immediate. We don't have to take weeks. What's 1 John 1:9 say? If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. The fact is, our cleansing comes from the Spirit in us to just cleanse us by our confession to say, what I just did there was not holy, was not consecrated. And so here it says, defilement is much easier, or uncleanness is much easier to pass on than holiness. Well, let's just put it this way. We could have, another way Haggai could have put this, or we can put this, is if someone has COVID and everyone else is healthy and you're all hanging out together in a very enclosed space, will you catch COVID? Good chance you will, right? I mean, communicable diseases. On the other hand, if all these sick people are in a hospital and you're healthy and you walk in their rooms, do all of them catch your health? No. That'd be foolish, right? A healthy person cannot run around with sick people and make them healthy. But a sick person can run around healthy people and make them sick. Uncleanness, the wickedness of this world, our own hearts, our flesh, it is easy for us to pass on those things to one another. Holiness, we can't. That's only through Christ. It's also to tell you, he said at the end of that, he says, this is what's been happening. They were assuming that they were holy, but they were instead passing on uncleanness. Even in the making the sacrifice that they were making, that's what they were doing. They were making the sacrifice. He goes, even your sacrifice is being defiled because you aren't right with me. You've assumed that because you've maybe built some walls or you've put some stones on this temple, that that's enough. It's not. It's not enough. And let's be honest, it is easy for us to become unclean with others. I mean, think about it. We get in a relationship with some people and maybe they gossip, and so what happens to us? We gossip. The Bible actually calls that murder. You're murdering their reputation. Maybe we hang out with different people and we intend to, be an encourager to them and try to be like Christ to them, but instead, we find ourselves in the same place they are. And the Bible's just making clear that, it's a lot harder for people to be consecrated than it is for people to find themselves unclean. So, in a sense, it's like, understand that passes on real easy. And we can look at it as, it's good that, we're not supposed to be away from people and we're supposed to be the light to the world. But if you find yourself not being the light when you're with people, then one, you need to go back and consecrate your heart. But two, you might want to investigate whether that's a wise decision to make. It's so easy for us, in a sense, in the same way that to just assume that our hearts and our minds and our desires are for God. In fact, Many of you know my girls, all my kids, like I've wanted them to be successful, right? We all want our children and those around us to be successful. But, as a preacher, you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm really wanting that for the Lord. But what the Lord has showed me more and more is really I wanted that for my name. For a lot of it, it was like, I want my kids to be successful, because then other people go, look, he must be a successful parent. Look at him. It's real easy when Ray and I came out here to start the church at Sun Valley. I mean, there was a part of us, or a part of me especially, that honestly, I wanted this church to grow and be successful, but in the end, part of my desire was that it would be for me. That's what the Lord showed. That there was a sense of like, is this about me or is this about you? And as I've had to walk it, God's shown me sometimes I've made it about me. In our desires to do right, the real question is, what's our motivation? Like the coolest thing now is my girls, originally they were good at softball. We spent time throwing and catching and all that stuff. And so when the people were like, man, your daughter's really good, it made me feel really good, and that was enough of it. But what's been awesome is to watch is as God's changed my heart, God's also changed their heart. And through it, we've got to see, when we've consecrated that to Him rather than to us, we've got to see Him use those exact same things for His glory. In fact, this last youth camp, my daughters, because they had some influence, because they were some of the better players on the team, when it came time, they invited their team, there was 11 other girls, to come to youth camp. 8 of them came. 4 of them accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. That was the moment when you go, yeah, that's all God. That was the moment when you go, wow, God, when we consecrate our abilities and our heart and our desires and everything that we do to you, it really should be about you getting glory. And what's really, we read at the beginning of church, Ezekiel chapter 36, 25 through 27. But really we can catch this in Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 23. Just a couple of verses before. He tells his people, it says, I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations. He's talking to his people, the Jews. He says, which have been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. What was he saying? The reality is, my name has been profaned because of your actions in your life. You did not consecrate yourselves to me, and you've profaned my name. But here's the amazing thing. He's not just shaming them. He's just telling the truth. But he says this, then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I am proved holy. How? Through you before their eyes. You know what he could have said? I've given up on you. Like, you guys stink. Like, I gave you all of these things. I've benefited you. You were supposed to be set apart and different from all the peoples, and instead, you worship the same idols. You've had these, you're the reason why my name's been profaned. We're done. But what does he actually say? He says, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to show who I am through you. Well, how's he going to do that? Because these people are messed up. Well, let's go back to verse 25 through 27. This is the promise that he makes them. Now you get the context of this verse. He says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove, have you caught what he's saying? Who's doing this? Him. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Here's the thing. When we consecrate ourselves to him, it's not us doing it. The moment we say, God, I want my actions to be for your glory. God, I want my actions not to profane you and who you are. I want them to bring you glory and your name to be held high. And God doesn't say, good, go for it. Let's see how it goes. He says, if that's your desire, I will clean you. If that's your desire, I will put a new heart in you. If that's your desire, I will make my spirit move in you so that you can follow the ways that I've called you to. It's not try harder, it's give yourself to him. Man, that is so encouraging because, folks, I have tried my best for many years to do everything God wanted me to do. And you know what? I failed miserably so often. But the incredible greatness is God says, set your heart about me. Not about you, not about what you want, not about your reputation. You set your heart, you give your heart and say, God, I want you to consecrate my heart for your ways. And he says, and I will do it. Today, all of us at the church at Sun Valley, remember, what is our vision statement, those who are part of this church? Inviting our neighbors to taste and see that the Lord is good, what? Through us. That did not come out of like my mind. You saw it right here. What was he saying? I want to do it through you. I want my name to be glorified through you. I want the people of this neighborhood and the people in this world and your neighbors to see me and my greatness through you. How's that happen? Consecrate your heart to me and I will make it holy. Consecrate your works to me, and I will make them holy. Today, what's he call us to do? Just come before him and say, God, I want you to do what you claim you'll do. And God says, good enough, I'll do it. All we have to do is say yes. Say yes. Will you pray with me? Father, oh God, we cannot make ourselves holy. But the living God who came to flesh in Jesus Christ because of his sacrifice, we through faith are made holy by him. And God, we know that every one of us here, if we were to be honest, there are times, no matter how much we wanted to, we have profaned your name to the people who live amongst us. And God, in our eyes and in our minds, and God, if I was making the rules, that would disqualify us from ever being a part of your plan again. But God, you are higher, your ways are higher than our ways, and your thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And God, you declare that you continue to want to use us to now bring glory to your name. You want to take broken vessels, clean them up, set them apart, and let the world see you through them. Lord, I pray today that the people here, individually and as a church, that will recognize the call on our lives, and that God will just say yes to you. That we'll recognize that you are the only one who can make holy our heart, our actions, our mind, everything. God, I pray you do that for me today. And I ask this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.